Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. We'll get started in a few minutes. I'm really excited to be hanging out here on Friday the 17th of April with you. It is 10 a.m. as of right now in Melbourne, Australia. So I can't wait to hang out with my co-founder, Angus Harvey. And even more excitedly is Julie Masters, who's a great friend, great mentor. We have the best conversations. So this is like, yay! I'm
Morning,
like a kid
everyone.
in a candy store. So
great
Julie
to be here.
Masters has a podcast called Inside Influence, in which she really delves into the minds of the world's most fascinating influencers, experts on influencers and on influence, and really she dives into what it really takes to get your own voice, and once you find that voice, amplify it to drive an industry, a conversation, a movement, or a nation. So Julie, hi.
Hi. It's lovely to be here. You're doing an awesome job.
Yeah, and I really loved the podcast that you did with Ty Montague about the idea of storytellers and amplifying that, taking it to the next level and moving it to story doers. So not only talking the talk, but walking the walk and driving purpose and a movement from storytelling, one of the most, the oldest technologies that we have.
Yeah, it's funny. I
I'm
was literally just on the phone with Ty this morning about how to be a story doing company in these times. So it's great that you picked up on that one, because he's an incredible mind when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, I was enthralled the entire episode. It should be part of every MBA course. But enough about that. Everyone, go listen to it on your own time. I highly recommend it. And Inside Influence in general. There's a button at the bottom of the screen where you can get a link to all the episodes. So have fun with that. First, I'd like to ask you a question. What is the weirdest, strangest thing that you didn't predict while you're in lockdown? In just this crazy pandemic predicament, what has really shocked you? That's for
Gus, you're going to take this one? Oh, that's for me.
People have heard from Gus. Whatever.
What's the weirdest thing? What really shocked me about this? I think that the weirdest thing for me, just personally, has been, when you work in a world of my primary world is communication. It's words, it's speaking, or it's the podcast, or it's teaching it in one way, shape, or form, or coaching. And I didn't have any words. I think that for the first 2 to 3 weeks, I felt really wordless. And that surprised me. And it was this we were talking about tensions today. It was this really interesting tension between, am I procrastinating and bowing out at a time when, it's necessary to contribute? Or am I being patient and waiting for the words to come back? And I could feel that tension in me constantly, So that was a surprise to me. I thought that I would be quick to jump to trying to be useful. And actually, for the first 2 to 3 weeks, I canceled pretty much everything, and I tried to focus on listening, because honestly, as altruistic as that sounds, I just didn't have the words. I couldn't find them. So that was quite shocking to me, and to many people that know me, that I had nothing to say. And so I think that was a bit of a surprise. I didn't think that I would respond that way.
Yeah, wow. How about you, Gus, man?
I think mine's it's interesting. It's related to what Julie was saying, which is that. Oh, sorry, I've got a bit of an echo here. Sorry, it's got a bit of a crazy echo. Hold on, there you go. and this idea that the moment the thing happened, we have this tendency to want to kind of try and impose narrative on it. Say, this is the story, this is what it means, this is what the implications are. And even though I knew that it was still too early to impose narrative, and I still think it's too early to try and put a narrative on this, I find myself wanting to dive in there and try and explain it and put it in context. And I keep on wanting to try to do that, and I keep on having to remind myself it's too early. We're only at the beginning of this. But I was shocked at how difficult it was to take my own medicine, so to speak.
I think it's really challenging when you're, that control thing. You want to put a structure around it. You want to make sense of it. You want to be able to put it together and go, look what this is what it is. This could be helpful here. And it didn't feel like the time. It didn't feel like there was enough information. It didn't feel like the most useful thing to do.
All right, cool. Let's dive into it a little bit then. We've been talking about this idea that narrative is somewhat lost in the current media and even direction in politics. And with the lack of a cohesive narrative and a united direction, what's emerging are these potential tensions, is I guess what we like to talk about. And one thing that was really exciting that you brought up the other day, Julie, was perfection versus process. Like, perfection is now passé, right? We spend most of our time in our sweatpants. You don't even have to wear pants to webinar meetings. We're all putting on our COVID-19 pounds as we stress eat. So perfection's out the window, but process has always been more compelling. And so I'd like to ask you, how does that tension get your mind cooking?
I think there's always been a tension there. It's been really interesting. For the past few years, we've been noticing the shift from perfect to, where the attention is going, where the impact is, from perfection to process, to progress and to process. If you look at branding and marketing, I mean, you can apply it to lots of different areas, but if you look at branding and marketing, we used to focus very deeply on perfection. There was a brand which by its nature is perfect. There's these perfect images of these perfect people doing their perfect things. And that was the predominant driver of making an impact, of influence. And there's been this, with the digital world, there's been this massive shift. And we've moved from perfection into process. And you look at the rise of reality TV, for example. You look at trust, where it sits now. So trust is, I think, with brands currently 35%, and our trust in human beings is now 65%. And that's because, human beings are compelling because of our lack of perfection. We are compelling because we make mistakes. We pick ourselves back up. We have complex emotions. We have different intentions. We carry it out differently all the time. We're learning. We keep moving. And so that's what we want. That's epic storytelling. That's what we follow. It's what we connect with. If you look at anything when you scroll, the things that you connect in with, it's human driven. I think 96% now of everything that we consume online comes from a human being rather than a brand. That's massive. And so what's happened, it's created this tension, talking about tensions where we know, and I'll talk about some other stats. We know that perfection, isn't really what catches our attention. But we've still been stuck with this feeling internally, this tension internally, that I will put that out there when it's perfect. I will do that when I feel like it's perfect. I will release this when I feel like it's perfect. And I'll step up and be seen when I feel like I am perfect, look perfect, sound perfect. And that's been the tension up until now. And then these past few weeks, this incredible thing has happened where there's almost now this global permissiveness to let go of perfect for a while. We're all sat here. I'm in my spare room. My children might come barreling through that door at any moment. I'm not wearing my sweatpants, but I usually am. And now all of a sudden we're allowing people's imperfections in. We're allowing people to just show up in their process. I'm showing up. I'm giving you the best that I've got. This is my process right now. This is where I'm at. This is my life. And I'm still showing up. I'm still giving you the best that I have. So this, again, focus on process. This is my process. This is what's happening, and I'm showing up and I'm giving the best that I have. I think that's a really interesting tension that's almost, weirdly enough, because of COVID-19, is getting resolved now, where we used to be impacted by progress, but we were still holding on to our perfect. And now we're kind of letting each other let that go. There's a, for anybody that wants to check it out, there's this incredible group within Google. They're called the Unskippable Labs. And it's run by a guy called Ben Jones, who's an amazing brain. And they basically, when Google owns YouTube, and when Google bought YouTube or created YouTube, they were trying to figure out what works from a storytelling point of view. Like we're getting all this revenue, we're getting companies asking us how they should create their stories online, and we don't really even know what works. We know there's a skip button down the bottom after 5 seconds. We know that people can press it, but we don't know why they press it. We don't know why they skip some and don't skip others. And so Ben Jones and his team created Unskippable Labs, trying to figure out what makes stories unskippable, what makes communication unskippable. And what they discovered was that this perfection thing was a total myth. They did this really interesting experiment. They went to L'Oreal and they said, right, we're going to do 3 ads with you. 3 ads. One, we're going to do highly produced celebrities, everything, all the usual perfect lighting. Second one, we're going to do an influencer in their house, a little less produced. And the third one, we're literally going to do a work experience student in the broom cupboard or the stationery cupboard, trying on the makeup and figuring it out. And what they found was, with younger generations in particular, the non-perfect one, the process one, the stationery cupboard one, got way more recall. So yeah, I think that tension between process and perfect is actually in the process of getting resolved much faster than it would have done before COVID-19. So yeah, that's actually one other thing on that. I think that in terms of epic storytelling, if you look at what makes an epic story, a story that makes the most impact, or a piece of communication that makes the most impact, and you step out of perfection for a while, it's usually 3 things. It's usually, is it personal? Do I believe you? Have you walked that road before, or have you held the hand of somebody else that's walked that road? The other one, is it relevant? How is this useful to me? How is this? We have, in my office, we have the keep it or share it rule. If a piece of communication that leaves us isn't relevant or useful enough for somebody to either keep it and refer back to it later, or share it with somebody else that they know, then don't send it. Don't put it out there. And this, what you guys have created here, this is a great example of that. And the next one is it a motive? And now by a motive, I don't mean, is it dramatic? You're pulling on emotional strings from a manipulative point of view. I just mean, are you using real language? Or are you using jargon, technical terms, business as usual language? Are you using the kind of language that I relate to?
Yeah, and the thing that comes straight to mind for me on this is leadership styles by various politicians around the world in terms of how they've handled this crisis. That idea of being open, showing what the process of their decision making is, as opposed to coming out and telling people exactly how things are going to be. That's what everything you're saying there seems to match up to that. I mean, how do you think different leaders have handled this around the world using that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation. One of the things in the past, it's got a little bit better, but in the past few weeks, particularly within Australia, I was kind of, every time the news would come on, I was saying to my husband, I was like, I just wish, Scott Morrison would just do a piece that can get out from, there's a need for official updates. Absolutely. Frequent updates with structure and clarity. But there is also a need for him just to be behind, I don't know, his desk and just do a personal message to the nation. This is where we're at. This is our intention. These are the things that we are monitoring. Believe that we will make, every decision necessary to keep this country safe. I am working with my team. We are going to show up for you every day, every second day, with everything that we know, just something. And you said there, process of decision-making. And I was actually talking to a guy called Bill Coletti, who's an expert crisis communicator, yesterday morning. I was interviewing him for the podcast. And I was saying, how do you communicate when you don't have the answers in a crisis? Because sometimes you feel like you're just showing up for the sake of showing up. Still don't have the answers. Speak to you tomorrow. And he was saying process of decision making is the key. We don't have the answers right now, but here are the 3 things that we are watching, and here are the 3 things that we need to be in place before we make a decision, so that the parameters that we're working on. And that's enough clarity. And again, that's focusing on your process rather than I am the leader, I have all the answers, perfection. I've lost you. I can't hear you. This is process rather than perfect. This is leaning into the showing up. Tane, is Gus muted?
I think Gus is muted. I'm not really sure why. But anyway, we can go on to the next tension.
He can mime it.
What's that?
He could mime it.
Yeah, you've got to do interpretive dance now, Gus, I'm afraid. So yeah, certain people are having issues with NBN. It's too slow. Is it you, Gus?
That's okay. Tell me if you can hear my mic.
Yeah, take your mic off, I think. Sorry, people. We're doing process. By the way, Julie, someone said you reminded them of Jacinda Ardern, which is probably the coolest compliment I think I've ever heard.
That is actually the coolest compliment I have ever received. That she is my crush.
Yeah, me too.
I crush on her in a large way.
Cool. So let's move on to the next tension. I guess efficiency versus adaptability. We have this idea. I might mute you, Gus.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's you that's echoing. I think you get rid of your mic. It's a beautiful mic, but I think it to just use the cam. Sorry everyone for the issues, but let's move on to the next tension. So this idea of efficiency versus adaptability, because in business we've always had this idea of growth versus equity, but neither is enough in the 21st century. So the idea of efficiency versus adaptability, it's kind of a bit like perfection versus process. The process is the adaptable part. But how do you think that rolls out in business and in brand management and influence, Julie?
I'm sorry, you cut out. Can you say that last bit for me again?
Just the idea that efficiency was a gold standard in business and how we got things done. We had to do dollars and cents versus being adaptable. And especially in rapidly changing times, it's really important to reevaluate that. And that tension between efficiency and adaptability is right.
Yeah, it does go back to the progress versus perfection piece. We expect efficiency, and I think during this time, again, one of the beautiful things for anybody that's wanting to try something new or has been sitting on the verge of an innovation for a while, once you can get out of putting fires out and making the decisions that you need to make to shore up whatever ship you're shoring up there's this really unique opportunity to go, I'm going to try some things, because people are in this very open space right now where we're open to things not being perfect. We're open to somebody just showing up and contributing. You know what? This is version 1. I'm putting it out there because it's needed, and I'm going to keep getting better as I go. We're going to iterate as we go. Talk back to us. Let us know what you think. There's this lovely opportunity right now where nobody's expecting perfection, and that opens a door, I think, to innovation, to adaptability, more so than this perfection, well-oiled machine does. And don't get me wrong, that is necessary. But it's very hard to innovate in that very well-oiled machine. Yes. So I think that there's a unique door opening now to adaptability, to innovation, to iterating, putting things out there.
Hi, Gus.
Gus, are we back?
Efficiency versus adaptability.
Great. Tell me how this sounds now.
Yay, Gus is back, everyone.
Great. This idea of efficiency versus adaptability is something I've been thinking a lot about. And I think why it's so interesting is that for the last decade or two, we've been imbibing this gospel that efficiency is everything. That your work processes have to get more efficient. We need to get to inbox zero. Our supply chains need to be just in time so that we can produce more output. Governments need to be more efficient, that there shouldn't be wasteful spending, that we should, there's 1,000 hacks that you can read on Medium blog posts about how to be more productive or how to get more out of your day, how to be a more efficient parent. So that's been a really strong message that's been with us for the last decade or two. And what this crisis has done is show us the shortcomings of efficiency, that it doesn't matter how efficient you are. As soon as something like this hits, it's not your efficiency that counts, it's how well you can adapt. And the company that really embodies this for me is 3M. 3M is the company that makes the N95 face masks. And they actually built something in 2002, 2003, after the SARS crisis. They decided to restructure their entire company around adaptability rather than efficiency. So they built in what they called surge capacity, where they said, if there's a crisis or we get an unexpected event, we have additional machines in the factory that normally lie idle, but we can spin them up overnight to start putting out more face masks. And so in January, when 3M started hearing what was coming out of Wuhan, they turned all these new machines on and increased their output from 50 million masks to 100 million within the space of about a week. And they're now saying they're going to bring in even more equipment, and they're going to be producing 2 billion masks by the end of this year. And what's so interesting about that is that having those idle machines lying there waiting for surge capacity, or having new hiring processes in place to bring new people on board, it wasn't very efficient. It cost them money to keep those things lying idle. But they knew that we now live in this complex world where shocks are going to be the new normal. And so they retooled their entire company around this idea of adaptability over efficiency. And I think what we're going to see in the wake of this crisis is more and more companies actually starting to prioritize that. So I think that's a huge shift that we've got coming down the line.
And I think that also speaks to the story doing thing we were talking about earlier. One of the things I was talking to Ty about this morning was Airbnb, to speak to what you were just talking about, and how Airbnb have pivoted he calls it a quest, they pivoted their quest. So they were, obviously providing travel and tourism and the ability for people to be able to roam freely and move freely. And now they're providing homes and safe places for emergency healthcare workers who've had to travel far from home, or who are in lockdown from their own families because of what they're exposed to. And, your ability to be able to adapt quickly to whatever's coming means that you're still going after your quest. I don't know what 3M's quest is, but you're still, your vision, your motivation is still the same, but you're adaptable in the way that you get there.
Yeah. Which adaptability, I think, is a key thing. And also being adaptable in your narrative, right? Like, you have to change the stories you tell yourselves, like ourselves and other people, if we want to change things. And narrative is so powerful. And that idea of antagonist and protagonist, like you kind of have to, at the heart of the quest needs to be something to conquer. And the enemy is someone who's the bad guy. And in this case, it's the COVID-19 virus. And it's like this weird alien thing. So it's nice because we're not fighting each other.
Yeah.
We're fighting something else. And I think that's unprecedented because we're in wartime economics and we're being highly adaptable. I mean, we're dealing with new technologies. We're dealing with new types of narrative, new physical locations. new social connectings, new different types of loneliness. Yeah, someone had just mentioned team of teams. Gus, you know a lot about that. The efficiency and uber specialization made the U.S. Special Forces ineffective versus the adaptable networks of what they were going out. And I think science is doing that as well. Literally breaking down the silos and doing open science, like open source science, which is highly adaptable. Throw the ideas of academic, credit out the window. Let's just conquer this and do everything we can to help out the world and our fellow human beings. All right. So speaking of, I sounded a bit too certain with my idea about science. So Julie, would you like to talk about the tension between confidence and uncertainty? Because again, like your ideas around this and also Gus's beautiful, and they've really ignited an exciting part of my brain. So over to you.
Yeah, just to speak to what you just mentioned as well. I know that we've had conversations about collaboration and how suddenly we're in the situation where we're now way more open source than we used to be. Yeah. We're sharing ideas. We're that common enemy piece where I used to call it the alien effect. Like, the only thing that will pull us together is when the aliens come, and then we'll have a common enemy, and then we'll finally come together. And suddenly there it is. It's not an alien. And we have this thing now where it's an us. We've come together as an us, and then there's a them, and which unfortunately is how the human brain works. Hero, protagonist. And why does that relate? That relates because if you are going to show up and collaborate, you're going to show up with your ideas. If you're going to contribute during this time, if you have mastery ideas or insights that could be useful during this time, either within your teams, within your organizations, within your communities, there's this tension, again, that I notice between the words confidence and certainty. And one of the things that keeps people and organizations really small is a focus on confidence. That we will do X, fill in the blank, when we feel I feel more confident. And I've seen an awful lot of very intelligent, very smart people who have incredible things to contribute stay very small as a result of just that one sentence.
Yeah. And
the truth is that confidence never arrives. It's one of the biggest myths in influence. Confidence doesn't arrive. It does not exist. You get confident when you show up over and over again. When you do the thing over and over again, you get confidence. By the time confidence has shown up, you don't need it anymore because you've been doing it. You have mastery over it. So this waiting for confidence, I think, is a huge misnomer. And what I prefer, and I think there's a huge need for right now, given this situation, is to communicate with certainty.
Yeah. And
to communicate with certainty is something you can access right now. If you're waiting for confidence, you'll be there for a very long time. And believe me when I tell you that the heavens are not going to open. It's not going to arrive. What I would prefer you to do is access certainty, and you can access certainty right now. Communicate with certainty right now. Certainty is it's a gravity. It's where I will bring to you. I will offer up. I will communicate the best of what I have today, where all my experience, where all my mastery, where all my mistakes have brought me. I will give you the best that I have today. And if I get a new piece of information this afternoon, or I change my mind this evening because something else happens, then I will pivot unapologetically. And I will give you the best that I have tomorrow with everything that I have. Mm-hmm. Now that is communicating with certainty. That is something anybody can do at any time. And it's a downward force. It's a gravitational force. Confidence tends to be more a heady force. It's upwards. Now the pivotal difference there is there's communicating with certainty and there's being certain. And they are two very different things. To be certain is a closed loop system. It's I am certain, and my entire agenda is to hold on to my certainty. And my ego is attached to it, my identity is attached to it, my power, my influence is all attached to my level of certainty. And there's no feedback loop there. There's no listening. There's no embracing new information, searching. There's no sense of curiosity. There's no searching for new information to continually expand and evolve your mastery. So there's that pivotal difference. To be certain is a closed loop. We see a lot of people who, especially in positions of power, who are holding on to that certainty, will not be shifted. And then we see a lot of people, which tend to be the people we admire, who communicate with certainty, but are very much open to shifting or pivoting or learning as and when they need to and as and when it's available. So I think there is a huge thirst right now and a huge need right now for people who can communicate with certainty, who choose to inhabit that space. And it is a choice, and it can be a deeply uncomfortable choice. And we were just talking before going on air about how showing up and communicating with certainty on platforms that you're new to, or you're not comfortable with, or they're not within your comfort zone, can be incredibly kind of disorientating. But that doesn't lessen the need that we have for people to show up and do it.
I love this idea of the downward force versus the sort of the heady knowing energy, and I wonder how, given that COVID-19 and the crisis is happening out there, it's actually happening in our heads. It's something that most of us don't have personal experience of it. It's not something like the bushfires in Australia, for example, where the sky is turning brown, or where we've seen physical evidence of it. COVID-19 is something that's just coming to us in messages, pictures, and text. So it's a very heady kind of phenomenon. Do you think that it's harder to be certain about a pandemic that mostly exists in ones and zeros on our screens? Is there something to that?
I don't think that there's any need to be certain about that. I think that's an impossibility. And again, at the beginnings, we were saying I didn't feel like I had anything to say for the first few weeks because I couldn't communicate with certainty. I didn't feel like there was any certainty to hold on to. It's new information. We don't know, as you say, it's arriving in pitches. And at that stage, I was still managing, and you guys speak brilliantly to this. I was still managing my information diet. I'd dive in for 2 hours of an evening and then feel paralyzed for the next 24 hours. And I was like, okay, well, that's not useful. So I was still really adjusting that. And then the flip comes when you go, okay, I don't need to communicate with certainty about this topic. I don't know this topic. I do not know what's happening here. I don't know what's going to happen here. The best I have is what everybody else has, which is sketchy information that's coming in on a lot of different angles. What I can communicate with certainty are any tools or insights or experience that I have as to how to deal with this situation with some certainty.
I really love that. I think so it's not about being certain about the crisis or what's happening or what is going to happen to our company or to our government or to our society. It's being certain in what and then broadcasting or sharing that with the people in your immediate and wider circles.
Well, we just launched, or about to launch next week, a new mini podcast series. And I think I was telling you about it. We're calling it The Next Right Thing. Because that's literally it. That's all we have at the moment. We have the next right thing. We have, what is the next right thing that we can do? What is the next right thing? Even from a parenting, you've got the leadership, you've got parenting. I was talking to one of my neighbors yesterday and she said, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm focusing on the fact that I'm going to get really good at apologizing by the end of this. Like, that's my next right thing. I'm going to learn how to apologize really well. Because I feel like I'm doing it all the time. So, what is the next right thing? What is the next right contribution? What is the next best thing you've got? So I think that's communicating with certainty. It's the showing up.
So I want to come back to this idea of the next right thing. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But there's another tension which I think comes into how we approach this, which is this idea of being positive or being optimistic about how things are going versus being realistic. And this is this tension that we describe as positive thinking versus intelligent optimism. You do hear quite a lot of people saying we should be or think, this idea of thinking positive. It's a bit self-helpy, possibly a little bit woo-woo, but it's not seen as a bad thing necessarily. People say, sure, you should think positively about what could happen or where or how this might all play out. And I actually think it can be quite dangerous, or I think Tane and I have certainly discussed this. Yes. And it comes down to something called the Stockdale paradox, which has been all over the internet. But just in case you haven't come across it yet, we'll see if we can explain it very quickly. It's named after a guy called James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war during Vietnam. And I think he was in the internment camps for many years, and he made it out at the end and was one of the few people that survived amongst the cohort of American soldiers that had been taken in. And he was asked by an interviewer what helped him get through, and he also said who didn't make it, what were the qualities of the people that didn't make it through. And he said something which it was so striking. He said that the optimists didn't make it. And the reason they didn't make it was because they would say, oh, it'll all be fine. We'll be out by Easter. We'll be out by Christmas. We'll be out by next year. And then when that date rolled around, the blow would be so crushing that they would never be able to get out the hole. And so what he said was that the attitude that actually helped them make it was being short-term, facing the brutal reality in the short term, fully facing up to how bad it was and how bad it was going to carry on being, but in the long term, always having faith that things would work out. So it's short-term realism versus very, very long-term optimism. And I think that really encapsulates this idea of intelligent optimism when it comes to something around like COVID-19. This is going to be really bad, but at the long term, we will make it.
Yeah. I think that for me, it's like really balancing realism and intelligent optimism. Like what's actually going on. We're in a really hard place and you need to stick with that. And that goes the same for like, emotional things. Sometimes you're in a bad place, but if you stick with it and you look at it at face value and really dive in and just let those feelings and realities sink in, but still have hope as a positive outcome and not even a necessary frame that getting over whatever your ailments or problems may be is a really powerful tool. It's adaptive, it's realistic, but it doesn't leave you up for massive disappointment, which is what leads to that like crushing thing when you're an optimist. And I'd like to point out that they don't even talk about pessimists because pessimists
don't even get up the starting gate.
Absolutely terrible, and you think you're done. That's a reality. So yeah, I like this idea of outrage plus optimism. So we should be upset with what our politicians and the economy is doing, but we also need to be optimistic. So like outrage and optimism kind of combined is O2. I'm a synapse, so it's oxygen. And I think that's what we need. We need to be active. We need to be outraged, but we need to do it in an intelligent and optimistic way.
There's a colleague and friend of mine, I think yours as well, Chris Helder, who talks about, he has this beautiful phrase. It's called useful beliefs. To be optimistic can, as we've said, positive thinking can often set you up for a crushing blow because you're putting your sense of all being well on something that you have no control over. But to have a useful belief about something. So, to use my example again around, this might not be fun for my family, but my useful belief is I'm going to be a pro at apologizing by the end of this. I'm just going to be like the world champion master. To have useful beliefs about it. Once you have a useful belief, no one can take that from you. One of the useful beliefs could be that I don't know when this is going to end. I don't know what it's going to look like, but we're going to be more innovative than we've ever been at the end of it. To hold on to some useful beliefs. So I think that's another really interesting reframe on, positive thinking doesn't work. what does work.
I think I love this idea of useful beliefs,
Yeah.
and even just having a long think about what is a useful belief that I can take with me all the way through this crisis, something that I can still have a year from now, a year and a half from now, that is going to serve me. That takes a bit of reflection and quite a lot of thoughtfulness, I think, but it's a wonderful challenge.
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of that a useful belief is something that is adaptable, that you're confident in, but you have a slight bit of uncertainty with, which is kind of the scientific method. You have to go in with knowledge, belief, but strong ideas and lightly held. All right. Speaking of science, let's go to our next tension. What do you think about politics versus science? Because science is now dictating politics. Our draconian laws of being stuck inside is being driven by science and like evidence. But so let's discuss politics versus science and where's the divide?
This is the thing that makes me most excited. This is, if you're going to ask me what my favorite thing about coronavirus has been, it's that the tail is now wagging the dog.
I like that.
Finally, thank God, we have got to the point where scientists and experts are being listened to again. We have been on a trajectory of dismissing the views of scientists and experts for 2 or 3 decades now in the West. It's certainly not the case in many Eastern countries, but in the West, we've gotten too comfortable, where we've said we can dismiss their ideas because the expertise and the benefits of science are so baked into society that it's a luxury, we can afford to ignore them. And now that the proverbial dung heap really has hit the fan, we suddenly go rushing to scientists. When things get really bad, when the chips are really down, it's very interesting who society turns to first. And there are very interesting parallels, and we're certainly not the first ones to point this out, to climate change. And if you think flattening this curve is hard, there's a much bigger curve waiting further down the line in terms of our carbon emissions. And my fervent hope is that a year, 2 years from now, public trust and public faith in scientists is going to be so high that maybe not just citizens, but also politicians will listen to scientists when it comes to some of our other big 21st century challenges, including pandemics, obviously climate change, environmental degradation, privacy, surveillance, the dangers of runaway, cyber attacks, etc. So this gives me huge hope. The tail of science is now wagging the dog of politics.
I love that. Because, I mean, at the beginning of every disaster movie, there's a scientist being ignored. Right?
Yeah.
I think we should heed that.
I actually had a question about that I've been meaning to ask you guys. And so here we are. So it seemed to be a good time. Is there any science coming out at the moment around the impact that, so much activity ceasing for a while is having on the environment, or predictions as to what impact it may have on the environment?
The answer is that it's too early to tell.
Too early.
I mean, it's a yes and. It's like that there's some certainty with certain scientific facts, like pollution and greenhouse gas emissions have declined, but there's no certainty that will continue. If we don't change our fundamental ways, then there's no certainty that this is going to have a fundamental change. But look, it's looking nice. Even birds are chirping more in the CBD when I go around.
That sounds anecdotal.
No, but I mean, look, if you go to the Future Crunch website and look at some of our, good news on coronavirus, which we'll post later, you can see that. But there's no certainty that will continue. I think Gus is right. I think this is a great way to reset politics and the direction of planet Earth, because stuff wasn't working, and this is a great time to reset. And I really hope we do that. All right, let's talk about we had this idea of apocalyptic versus catalytic. And I don't even want to begin to start describing that. I'm just going to hand it over to you two because this is a fun one. Are we in the apocalypse or is this a catalyst?
Yes.
Or yes?
Well, I'd be interested, Judy, when you look at that tension, what does it kind of immediately bring to mind, if anything?
What it immediately brings to mind to me is those pivot points. I feel like pivot is the most overused word currently, but also the most applicable word. It's either it's definitely going to destroy a lot of things. A lot of things are going to, if you look at it in terms of burn down, a lot of things are being burned down right now. Businesses, structures, conversations. And then, so that's the apocalyptic part, right? That's the part that much so is true, and will continue to be true for we don't know how long. And then there's this other bit which fits really nicely with the adaptability side, which it's also could act as a catalyst and will act as a catalyst for certain things, for certain ways of thinking, for certain business models, for certain conversations. It will be a catalytic moment. And so I guess the tension there is the decision, and I'm interested in your thoughts, the decision as to which side you want to spend most of your intention and attention on, the apocalyptic side or the catalytic side. How is this going to catalyze my business, my thinking, the kind of conversations, the information that I let in? How is this going to catalyze me in terms of how I step up and be of service? So destructive force as opposed to a propulsion force. That's the first thing that comes to my mind, but I'm going to pass to you on that one.
Well, for me, it's all those things. I think you've expressed beautifully many of the things that not just Tane and I are feeling, but I think that many people who tuned into this webinar are probably feeling around this as well. When I look at this tension, for me, this is my useful belief. This is the useful belief that I'm going to take through this. Which is that everything that's happening right now is a catalyst for the next thing that I'm going to become. So every email I get, with a piece of bad news, every invoice that fails to now go out, every conversation that I have about how crazy this all is, if I frame those as catalysts rather than evidence of the apocalypse, they feel totally different. And this is this idea of intelligent optimism. It's once you have the belief, the world looks suddenly very different. And so once I have this idea that this is a catalytic opportunity, everything that's going on, not just in my home or in my immediate community, but everything that's going on out there as a consumer of information, takes on this appearance of the catalyst. And that's my useful belief that I think I'm going to take through this with me.
I think it's a beautiful question to even, I'm just thinking, put on the wall. How will this become the catalyst for what I become next, for what my business becomes next, to what my family becomes next? I know even in my own home, this is a catalyst to something different for us. The way that we structure our home life, the way that we structure how we co-parent, the way that we structure how we work together as a family will be forever different as a result of this experience. It'll be the catalyst to a different version of our family.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's a really important question to ask ourselves. How can the current environment catalyze your life, and how can it be better? How can we use this as a situation that ignites a fire under the ass, basically, to do better things for each other and better things for the planet? And of course, that's not set in stone, but we have to think about it. We have to imagine the future for it to come to fruition. And I think that's really important. And my mom has told me this time and time again. It's like, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And this is the time to really think and reflect and think about hard decisions and things that we need to change. Speaking of
I think very quickly on that.
You're more eloquent than I am. So you should probably...
No, because you're just tapping into something that I've been thinking a lot recently, which is, relationships. And, everything is a relationship, right? Your relationship with your community, your customers, everything is a relationship. And take my husband and I, for example. We're usually rushing, handing the baton of the children, rushing between. Let's sit down and talk about that next Sunday. Let's put a time in the diary. That's a factor of the phase of our lives at the moment. And it means that we have avoided, I'm just being really honest, it means that we have on some levels avoided the hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
On some level avoided the hard conversations, because in the moment when you're in it, you're too busy, not now. And that when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. I think that that's very true. And there's another flip to that, which is when the going gets tough, the tough stand in it. The tough stand in the fire. That's what the tough do. Yeah, we stand in the fire together. Yeah. We don't run from the fire. We don't dance around it. Well, maybe we do at the end. We stand in the fire together. And I think that this has become a catalyst for that on many levels. We're standing in the fire together. How do we want to do that? We can't run now. We've got nowhere to go. So I just wanted to pick up on that because I love that line, and my mum uses it a lot. When the going get tough, the tough get going, and can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. They're mummisms, right? Yeah. But I also think there's something too when the going gets tough, the tough stand in the fire.
Julie, I wanted to ask you a question on that. We've spoken before about how hard it is to have those real conversations with your families, but also with employees or colleagues, yes. Or your boss, with your wider community, with your friends. And you've done quite a lot of work around how to have hard conversations. And I wonder if you could maybe just share some of that work with us.
Yeah, it would help us get along better.
I hope you're not getting along. Honestly, it's funny. My wish has changed. I hope you're not getting along well right now. I hope that now is the time when the tensions come out and they become catalytic. That is the right. Yeah, that's the right way to pronounce that. Yeah. I hope we are dealing with the tough stuff right now. Because quite frankly, if we're not dealing with the tough stuff right now, we're not going to deal with it. Yeah. So how to do that? It's funny. This work is an amalgamation of lots of different work that I have done and created and been a part of over the years. And it started with my team. And I used to do this little session for new team members, and I called it the drama hook. It was very much just internally within our organization. And it comes from a set of work from a thing called Money and You, and the fact that, we all get hooked by drama. Something intense happens, we get hooked into it, and then we either, we kind of feed off it, or we throw some more fuel on it. It gets bigger, it feeds us. It's a way of getting emotions out of our body. It juices us, and we hate it and love it all at the same time. And then we internalize it and move on, or not move on, as the case may be. And so I used to do this little session with them called the drama hook. And it was a 5-point process about how to deal with, we would call it drama, but how to deal with high intensity, high stakes conversations without getting hooked on the drama of it. And, it starts with engagement and matching intensity. There's this beautiful example that when they train emergency call takers for 000, 999, depending on where you live, they don't match them. They don't train them to do what you think that they would do. They don't train them to calm someone down initially.
Yeah.
They train them to match the intensity. So if I'm calling and my house is on fire, the last thing I want to hear is, "It's okay, just calm down. I need you to calm." That is the last thing I want to hear. Because what happens internally for me at that stage is you don't get it. You don't get it. You don't get the severity of the conversation. So I am going to escalate until you freaking get it. Yeah. And what they train them to do is match intensity. And that's very different to matching emotion. If someone's angry, the request is not to get equally as angry. What you do is you just match the intensity of the emotion, the speed, the pitch, the tone, the intent of the emotion, of the intensity. So that's the first one.
Otherwise, you're minimizing their feelings, right? You're minimizing it. It's like, just calm down. Don't be too. Yeah.
And who wants to be told to calm down, by the way? Who loves that? No,
you need to calm down.
Yeah, right? You need to just, what what did I say the other day? Which as soon as I said it, I was like, it's like, you need to come down 3 notches. And I was like, oh no, that's not going to go well. Whatever happens from here is not going to go well. Pardon? Number 2 is intention. And this is probably the most underutilized force on the planet, I think, on intention. To state your intention. Intention kills story. If I have a story about you that you never do this, you always do this, this always goes this way. If you state an intent early on, it kills story. So your intention might be, do you know what my intention in this conversation is? Just to hear you. I just want to hear you. I want to hear everything you have to say, and I'm going to sit here until you feel like, everything that you need to say has been heard. So state your intent. Third one is then delivering the information if that's appropriate. And information should be, I call it bulletproof information. It's basically just bottom lining, especially when things are moving fast and it's high intensity. You need to bottom line information in a way that the other person can repeat it to somebody else or repeat it to themselves later. And it's just simplifying. If you look at who we trust people that can bottom line things for us.
Yeah.
So bottom lining information, obviously in an accurate way, but being able to say the 3 things, the 3 things that I want you to remember are this. We need to do this. We need to focus on this. We need to remember this. Then chunking up. And again, this is another Chris Helderism, to chunk up, which is to remind somebody of the bigger picture of where we're going, the bigger picture of who we are, the bigger picture of who we intend to be, and short versus long term. This is who we are. This is where we're going in the short term. And don't forget, this is where we're going to end up. And so, we're walking this path together. And then the final one is check-in. To check in. And to check in is either to repeat. And again, if it's a high intensity conversation, a lot can get lost. So, I just want to go over what I heard, and I just want to and repeat what I want you to remember out of this. And then request. To request, I'd like to request that we check back in 2 days' time. I'd like to request that we focus on this going forwards. Is this something that you're able to agree to? So you're actually building a pathway to action, or Nancy Duarte, another amazing thought leader in this space, you're illuminating a path to action that we're going to hold hands and work together. So that's the 5-point structure. There's a lot more depth to it, but that's the part of it. And whether you use my structure or somebody else's structure, I cannot recommend enough during uncertain, high intensity times to have a structure for your communication. It's like a map. If you go off course, it brings you back. You're gonna teeter, you're gonna waver, but you're gonna get where you're going. If you start out with no structure, it's a one-way road to getting completely off course.
Yeah, I like that bit of a framework, but which gives you a better place to play.
Gives you, sorry?
It gives you a better place to play. If you have framework, you can play in a more intelligent and safer way.
Yeah.
But I think for me, what you really honed in on was just the art of listening. Because everything is reflective. You're not telling people. You're actually listening and reflecting. It's like the last thing, check in, summarize, remind people of the bigger picture, but listening to them, matching their intensity. You can't match their intensity if you're not listening to them on both emotional and auditory level. I really like this. It's cool.
A more simplistic version, just in 10 seconds or less, is first you focus on state. What state is somebody in? And your own state. Deal with your own state. Deal with somebody else. We're going to take 5 minutes. We're going to go for a walk. We're going to have a cup of tea. We're going to come down as best we can. And we're going to come back to this. So first you deal with state. You cannot ignore state. Secondly, you deal with the situation. This is the situation that we're in. How do we want to deal with this? And then third, you go to system. How do we prevent ourselves finding ourselves in this situation again? A lot, depending on how your brain works, some people jump straight to system. Some people jump straight to situation. Some people get stuck in state. But that's the flow. You start with state, you move through, you get to situation, you move through, and then you move through to system.
Yeah, and reiterate. All right, cool. Do you want to answer some questions? Should we open this up to a bit of Q&A for the last couple of minutes?
Sure.
We're getting to the hour level of this. So people can decide to hang on if they want to. Let's do some live questions because there have been some great ones. the number one is, should Gus do more interpretive dance? It's 100% yes. Now to more serious questions. Julie, can you repeat the 3 things to communicate when you don't know the answer? Like communicate about the decision process.
The 3 things when you don't know. That goes back to the Bill Coletti crisis communication. So what he talks about, I'm not sure it was 3 things, but what he talks about is when you don't have the answers yet, to talk about the parameters of your decision making. So, we don't have the answers, but these are the 3 things that we're paying attention to right now. Here are the 3 things that need to be in place before we move forwards, so that so it's a transparency of decision making, as opposed to the perfection of, which I think we tend to do as leaders. I will show up when I have my da-da moment.
Yeah.
Here I am, da-da. And I think that, again, it's this shift from perfection to process.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I like that. If anyone wants to answer questions or ask questions in the comments, go for it. So Amelia Loy, who's another mentor and friend of ours, loves the idea of the dramatic hook a lot, and she'd love a reference to an article from you, Julie. And we can post this in the notes afterwards. But yes, there's a big thank you on that one.
Awesome. Well, I don't know. Like I said, it started with definitely the term drama hook comes from a body of work called Money and You.
Yeah.
But I've played with it a lot over the years. And so I don't want to, I don't want to reference that directly in case it's not doing justice in the form that it is now. I will check to see if I have anything. And if I don't, then I should probably write something. So I'll let you know.
Cool. Julie, we will share those 5 steps with everyone who attends the podcast. We'll send it up as a follow-up email. And we'll also pass on any resources, but I don't think we need much more than the 5 steps. So we'll share that with all the attendees afterwards.
Great.
Cool. There's one question that I'd like to ask. With regards to certainty, our current situation is brought to their attention that not only just how very little we have control, and also a full set of certainty over anything beyond this particular moment. So moving to these next steps is letting go of that full sense of certainty and control. Is that like rocket fuel? Like, to me, for this, like, what do you think about it? Like, being certain and confident in what you believe, being willing to let it go is very powerful. And how do you do that daily, on a daily basis? And is it difficult sometimes when you feel depressed or, I don't know, distracted? Like, how do you hold beliefs really tightly, adamant, certain about them, but be willing to change your mind? How does that really roll out in your daily life? Good question.
A question. I'm going to reference the ultimate teacher of all time, which is Frozen 2. For any of you who have small girls in your household, you'll know Frozen 2. For those of you who don't, I'm so happy for you. There's where the next right thing, where the phrase "the next right thing" came from, actually comes from a song in Frozen 2, and it's a moment in time when the main protagonist, is lost in the woods and has lost someone that they love, and they don't know where to go from here, and they're completely overwhelmed. And this idea that, you need to be certain in order to move or communicate with certainty. And I don't think that is correct. I don't think that we are ever certain. I think it's if we feel absolutely bulletproof with something, usually we need to let it go a little bit, like loosen our grip a little bit. But to move forward with certainty is to, again, go back to that centralized question. What is all my experience and my knowledge and my insights and my mistakes and my skills? What are they telling me right now? What should I be doing? What's my next right thing right now? How do I show up right now? It could be, how do I show up in that lounge room when I go in to my family? It's how do I show up in a work environment? It's how do I show up as an influencer? How do I want to show up right now with certainty? I give you the best that I have in this moment. and I am not certain, and I will probably never be certain, but I can communicate with certainty. I can take a step forward with certainty. I can do the next right thing. And that for me is the distinction. And that is especially important. You know, when I had those 2 weeks at the beginning of this where I just didn't know what to say, I felt frozen. You know, I felt very much like I don't know if I have what's necessary here. You know what, this is so big, maybe it's too big for me. Maybe it's, you know, this is meant for greater minds than mine. And that sense of overwhelm, of not being enough, or that sense of, you know, everybody else has got this, I'm just going to back down. They've got louder voices. They've got more experience. It keeps a lot of very important information small, and it keeps a lot of very important insights not available. And so even in those moments, what's the next right thing? All right, well, I'll explore what, if I was going to say something, what could I say? What would be useful? What is true? What is factual? Yeah. So coming back to that next right thing, you know, even in an overwhelmed state, keeping an experimental mindset enough to be able to ask yourself that question and follow, and to the best of your ability in that moment, follow through.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'm certain about as I go forward is that I need more ideas and great people, and people that are a lot better than I am in different industries, different academic insights, or whatever. Cannot do this alone. We are citizens of the world, and the only thing that I'm certain about is we need all kinds of ideas, and that's the only way we're going to get forward. And I mean, even to get my foot beyond, just to listen to the plants, the animals, the environment as well as people who are experts.
Julie, that idea of the next right thing, you are thinking of starting, or you're playing around with a podcast themed around that. Is that right? You've got Inside Influence, which is your existing podcast, and there's a little button at the bottom of the screen there where people can listen and follow the link to get to your existing podcast. But you're now playing with this idea of asking people what the next right thing is. It's a lovely one. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So that goes back to the experimental mindset again, and you know, the best that I could think, the best movement with some certainty was, what would be the next right thing? Like, what is the next right thing? And okay, I have access to a lot of really, really smart people, you know, past guests of the podcast from all over the world, from Navy SEALs to talking about fear, to, you know, ad execs, to, you know, CEOs, UN facilitators. I have access to all of that. Okay, so if I have access to all of that, what do they know for sure right now? What's the one thing that they're focusing on, or advising other people to focus on, that they know for sure works, or at least is useful in uncertain times? Okay, well, I could go out and I could ask them that question. And so, you know, we talked about in the beginnings of this, you know, I was kind of doing it, playing with it at first, just going, well, you know, if this doesn't, you know, this is the way I can keep myself moving. If this seems like a bad idea, you know, I won't do it. But just ask, what's the next right thing? What's the next right person to ask? What's the next right movement? What's the next right thing? And putting it together, and it's probably going to be launched, I think, next week or the week after. And it'll be very short, 20 minutes. And actually, while we're here, what I would love is for anybody who's still online at the moment to, you know, what is your greatest challenge in terms of influence right now? If you could put it in the comments or wherever it fits. What's your greatest challenge in terms of influence? Either influence one-on-one, influencing other people, or influencing at scale. You know, if you're looking to build a brand, build a business, create a movement, start a conversation. And then I will take that and either weave it into the Next Right Thing podcast, or weave it into Inside Influence, which is a longer form. They're more 1 hour long, deeper conversations. So yeah, the next right thing, ironically enough for me, was to create the next right thing.
What about the kind of the sheer upset in terms of your own business models? How have you kind of stepped through the destruction, I suppose, of your entire business in some senses, which is there's speaking, there's, you know, you had a whole plan. You've obviously spent a number of years building up, getting momentum, and suddenly the carpet's been whipped out from underneath your feet. How have you been processing that and dealing with it? Do you have any practices? Have there been any things that have really helped you? What's the experience been like for you?
At a very practical level, giving myself regular interventions. Self-intervention has been a very useful skill where you're just like, right, I'm going to get up. I'm going to go literally sit in my front garden. We have this very small patch of green outside. I'm going to go sit in my front garden for 5 minutes because this thought process is not helpful. Or I'm frozen, or, whatever it might be. So I'm frozen too. And again. So giving myself an intervention, and the words that keep coming back to me at the moment are deep work. Now is a time for deep work. It's a time to do my own deep work on myself and areas where I am stuck or areas where I play in fear. It's a time to do deep work with my husband. It's a time to do deep work as a parent. It's a time to do deep work as a CEO. It's a time to really drill down on the quality and the depth of thought and reflection that isn't possible in a normal environment when I'm jumping on and off planes and there's 1,000 things happening. Yeah. Now, I mean, really realistic about that. It sounds very utopian. I'm just sat here doing my deep work. I have 2 kids under 3, running around, and there are moments where, I'm watching my business be razed to the ground. My husband's in real estate, he's exactly the same. Yeah. And I'm on the floor of the lounge room drawing zebras, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? Like, this is, what are you doing? You shouldn't be drawing zebras right now. And so there's this constant tension between being present to what is and trying to work on what's next. And that is a daily battle for me at the moment, or a daily catalyst for me at the moment.
I think that's a daily battle we all face, but also I like it. With self-intervention, you can turn it into a catalyst. That's what really resonates with what you said for me.
Actually, the other night, my husband said it was about 7:30, 8 o'clock, and he said, "Where are you going?" And I was like, "I'm going to go to bed and give myself an intervention." I'm doing it frequently.
Cool. Yeah, intervention is good. I'm playing in the garden. It's the way I'm getting around it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a veggie patch that's being destroyed by snails at the moment. So I'm regularly there picking off snails.
All right, so maybe we bring this to a close. Is everyone okay with that? All right, love you guys, and so happy to have Julie in particular, the next Jacinda of Australia. I really hope so. Julie Masters from PM. Like, seriously, we need a positive influence.
So just a couple of reminders. We will email everyone who's been on this webcast. We will share Julie's podcast. We'll also share links to her upcoming projects. Is that available yet, Julie?
No, it's not available. We're just playing. We were hoping for launch next week, but okay. It looks like it might be launched the week after.
That's fine. Yeah. We'll keep a lookout on the Future Crunch newsletter. When Julie does launch that podcast, we'll alert everyone in the Future Crunch newsletter. We'll also send an email with the drama hook and just those 5 steps to everyone. In the meantime, Julie, apart from the podcast, where do people find you? How do they get in touch?
The best places to find me are LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where I do my kind of business. Instagram is a collection of business and just general behind the scenes randomness. So they're probably the best 2 places to find me, and obviously my website, which is juliemasters.com.
Okay, and they can find the links to your LinkedIn and Instagram on the juliemasters.com website.
I believe so.
Okay, and it should be easy enough to Google. As a reminder to everyone, we'll be doing another one of these podcasts 2 weeks from now with the amazing Kayla Colbin. The details on that will be in our Future Crunch newsletter, so please keep an eye out on social media. We'll be making those announcements. And a big thank you to everyone who's tuned in from all over the world. It's been wonderful. Julie, thank you. So many
Thank you for the
lovely
invitation.
nuggets of wisdom. It's so great to see and so great to connect and hear your news. So thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Julie. Julie Masters for PM got my vote.
I don't even know if I'm allowed. I'm British. Am I allowed?
Who cares? I mean, like, they never followed that in the beginning. That was part of the kerfuffle. But I think it's important to remember that countries with female leaders have fared far better in the COVID-19 crisis than any other nation. So that's something to keep in mind. Anyway, love to everyone. Thank you, Julie. Love to
Thanks again.
You.
All right. Cheers,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Love everyone. Love you guys. Bye.